So my name's Dan Ellmore and this is my Metro 6R4.
And the first thing I've got to say, I know your story, you saw this car when you were a kid, and I saw the 6R4s in 1986 at Albert Dock and the overnight stop, and it was sort of like, that for me was the car. Tony Pond was the man.
Yep.
But you saw this at an event a couple of years later, didn't you?
Yeah, so I was at the RAC in 86 at Shield Forest, and exactly the same, you know, Tony Pond, English car, underdog, all of that, you know, and the noise is what did it for me. They're just so unique. In modern terms, the Subaru, the boxer engine on the Subaru, you hear that going down the road and you know what it is. Well, you know what a 6R4 is from that bark, you know. So that's kind of where I started to like the car from. And then I was aged 14 and I went to Birmingham Super Prix in 88 and watched the 6R4 race, and this car was in the race. And then roll on to 2015 and I bought this car and we were restoring it, and I thought, right, I want to find a livery for it, an original livery that it was in. And as I researched it, turned out I'd watched it race at the Super Prix in 88, and so that's why we put it in this livery.
So this is more than a labour of love. It's like finding your true love after seeing a photograph of her years ago.
Kind of like that, I guess. Yeah. I mean, I spent 10 years looking for a car, and when I got one, it turned out to be one that I kind of knew, so it was amazing.
So you found a unique way of keeping your interest in 6R4s bubbling away during those 10 years you were looking.
For sure.
And that's fantastic in itself. If you want to explain about that and promote it as well, because we're happy to promote it.
Yeah, I mean, I'd seen this car as a teenager, and my dad had competed in rallying and things like that, but I'd not really got into motorsport and what have you. And then in the late 90s, I started working with a friend of mine called Colin Casey, and he owned a 6R4, and once I'd been in it, it was too late then. I knew that was it, that was what I was after. Colin had his car for a while and then sold it, and then said to me, well, I have this website, 6r4.net, you know, I had it when I had the car, I don't really do anything with it. Did you want it? I know you're an enthusiast. So I took that on with a friend of mine, Nicky Linden, and there's now a third guy, David Sims, who's well known in 6R4 circles. He helps us as well, and so the three of us run that site, and yeah, we've been running that since the late 90s. And it took me till 2015 to buy a car, but you know, all the way along in there, we've gradually got to know all the owners, and we, you know, event organisers come to us and go, oh, we'd love a 6R4 for this show here, and so we contact the owners and say, if anybody wants to go to that, then they're looking for a car, and you know, things like that. So yeah, it's great to be kind of part of that network. So
yeah, and in a way it's the glue that holds all the 6R4 contacts together, isn't it, in a way?
I mean, we'd like to think so. I'm not sure we're that important to 6R4s, you know, but we'd love to think that, you know, we were, and we were an integral part of that network, really, and we were helping other owners. You know, sometimes we help people, we can kind of help verify the history of a car. If someone's looking to buy it, to make sure they're getting an original one and they're getting the one they think they're getting. And yeah, owners have got parts for sale, and owners have got parts that they need, and so, you know, keeps us busy, and it keeps us talking about 6R4s, which means it's always fun, you know.
Which brings me to the next question, because as an enthusiast who's worked in the car industry, I always look at these cars and think, right, which bit's metal and which bits, because some of the manufacturers just made a GRP shell of the whole monocoque. With the 6R4, there's basically the centre section is the steel original, isn't it?
Yes, so your A pillars, B's and C's are metal. They had an alloy roof. This one's now got a steel one because it's had a few roofs on it in its history. But the rest of the bodywork is all either fiberglass or Kevlar, even including the boxes on the doors, the sills, the rear wings, bonnet, tailgate, and the front and rear panels as well, like the bumpers around there. So yeah, most of it is Kevlar.
Right, so the next question is mechanically, talk us through a 6R4 under the skin, because it's an amazing piece of kit. All the Group B cars were. They were all unique in their way of transmitting the four-wheel drive to the drive to all four wheels.
Yep.
So what's the 6R4 method?
So you've got a 3-litre V6 in the back, and then you've got a centre diff which then splits the power. They were a standard 65 at the rear and 35 at the front. You can get 55-45 as well. Some of the works teams decided to run, works drivers decided to run a 55-45. So, and that was the preferred one for rallycross. So, still got the bulk of the drive from the back. Yeah, I mean, in the front end, under the bonnet there's a giant limited slip diff in the centre and not a lot else. There's a lot of fresh air under there, and yeah, where in a road car you'd expect the rear seats and the boot, there's just this boiling hot huge lump of metal that's making a lot of noise.
And this engine is a slight change from the norm in terms of it's a standard modification, let's be honest about that, but the original engines are hen's teeth.
Yes, the previous owner to me, I don't know, probably about 10 years ago now, was still rallying it regularly and blew it up. And yeah, they're a fortune to buy a new engine, and it just, the running costs on them, on the original engines, you can do 1,000 miles, then you need a rebuild of the engine, which can be up to 20 grand. So, you know, every season you need to spend 20 grand to keep it running, and if you can buy one, they're 40-50 grand just for the engine. So phenomenal amount of money. So he went down the route of buying a Jaguar 3-litre V6 and then tuning that up. So we're running virtually the same power, more torque than the original engines were running because they were a lot older engine. But yeah, we've got like a fraction of the cost. It's a couple of £1,000 to strip it and rebuild it instead of 20, and it'll do 3,000 miles between that service interval as well. So it's a much more usable engine, which has worked out really nicely for me because I love driving it. I want to take it to as many events as I can. I want to make sure it stays out there, and 6R4s stay out there. So having an engine that probably, you know, is going to cost me 20 grand a year to run would be really expensive and too much of a burden, but this has meant that I've got a car I can use as often as I can.
And what are, I mean, you spent 10 years searching out yours. If someone's lucky enough to find one, and a good one, what are they looking at?
They come up every now and then. There's a couple up available at the moment, and they're kind of between the, well, one of the ones that's for sale at the moment is 350,000. It's been for sale for a while. And it's not got a works history, although it's in the works colours, so that I think is why it's not going for that kind of money. But there are others for sale around the 180, 200, that kind of area. And then if you want a works car, you know, if you want, there's a Malcolm Wilson car that got a 4th, Tony Pond's car that got a 3rd in the RAC. Those kind of cars, you know, those are just, sky's the limit. You're then into the realms of trying to get a car off somebody who never wanted to sell it in the first place.
Yes.
So then you just have to...
Well, you wouldn't sell a car like that, would you? You couldn't.
No, I mean, you know, I'm not looking to sell this.
No.
But I've had that thought where I go, well, because I have been asked if I want to sell it quite a few times.
Of course, yeah.
You know, when in the first couple of years that I had it, I couldn't go to an event without somebody going, is that the one that's for sale? No, that's not for sale. Oh, well, how much would it be for sale for? You know. And so you kind of think, well, if you don't want to sell it, you know, is there a point where you'd give in and go, all right, that's ridiculous, but if you'll give me that for it, then I'll sell you it, because I can go buy another one. So, you know...
don't give the number, you'll hurt yourself.
I had that, no, but I had that thought for a while, and then another part of the reason we put this livery on was I went to that event with my parents, and we lost my dad last year.
Yeah.
And it was him that was into motorsport, that got us into motorsport, and he was the one who suggested we went to the Birmingham Super Prix, and that happened in lockdown, and during lockdown we'd already decided to do a livery, so it kind of all fitted together.
Please tell me he's had a chance to have a ride in the car.
He's been in it.
Oh, yes.
Yes, he's been in it on the road, and we came back down, when it came back from going out on the road, and he said, I really like that. So I went on a track day, and I took him out in the track day, and the first lap he was going, oh, that's got some power, it's a bit quicker than my old Mini. He had a Mini Cooper in the 70s. And on the second lap, we were going down the back straight, and he's going, well, go on then, son, get past him. So it only took him a lap, and he was in his 80s, but it took him a lap, and he was back in the groove. Right, let's have these guys down the straight and get past them. And yeah,
that's a moment you can't buy now. That moment is, you know.
And if I did ever sell this, I won't have that.
Yeah.
Even if I sold this and bought another one, I won't have that.
Yeah, and you know this car, you know everything about it. You wouldn't have to go through all the... Yeah.
You good?
Little thing, isn't it?
It is an angry wasp, isn't it? An angry wasp.
It is, yeah. Yeah, definitely.
It's got some grip on it.
35-year-old car?
35-year-old got its bonkers, isn't it?
Yeah. How the hell does it grip like that?
Madness.
Yeah. The development was right, wasn't it?
Yeah, oh yeah, Williams got it right, didn't they?
Oh yeah, did they ever? Wow. What a thing. Yeah.
Like that?
Yeah.
Good.
Pretty spot on.
Oh, nice.
There's some really random history that came up with this car, and I've added to some of it as well. But so this car's second owner was Will Gollop.
Right.
Yeah, European Rallycross champion. I mean, in the
Mr.
90s,
6R4. Yeah.
I used to watch Rallycross on.
Yeah, me too.
On World of Sport every weekend, or
Will Gollop and his what was it? Twin turbo.
One twin turbo, yeah. Well, this one wasn't Rallycross, but he owned it. Before that, the first owner that had it in this colours, he let Richard Burns drive it, world rally champion. So, you know, that's got some incredible history there. While I've owned it, Harry Toivonen's driven it with me in it, scared the life out of me. It was funny, he was so fast, and then he said, was that all right, or should we go faster? And I was like, nope, that's enough. So Harry's driven it, and Craig Breen, Hyundai World Rally driver, he's driven it. And this is the only one to have been to Buckingham Palace. We did the Queen's 90th birthday. They had one car from every year of the 90 years, British car, and we were there for that. So.
You can't ever sell this car.
And then obviously in the last 12 months, Stig's dad's driven it, and Car SOS, Fuzz has driven it, and Tim Shaw's been in it, and I've driven Fuzz, and then Fuzz drove it. So it's got some, you know, it's got some history to it now.
This one over here is unsighted right.
Yep.
And I'm cautious on it. And you're like, you know, it's good. And I'm like, oh,
Yeah, keep her going, keep her going.
Yeah.
Yep. That's about the only thing I can use this mirror for, is just to make sure my door's shut. Thank you. Cheers. Stage 8. Special stage start 8.
Was that 20?
Something like that. I won't get too excited until she puts her hand up here somewhere.
Yeah.
Hopefully
I'll put it in gear at that point.
Hopefully I can see it this time, because it was way up high and I was like, what? You know when you park too close to the traffic lights?
15.
Ready? 4, 3, 2, 1, go! Alright. Nice and steady, nice and steady. Hold on, oh, good. Well done. Caution for the tight belt, not too much though. Keep it going, keep it going, keep it going. And this is knees as you go round, that's it. Now back on, go, good, well done. Square left, towards that. So hard and square left, good. Nicely done. Could be later, but that's fun. And round we go. One last beat. Nice and steady. Just ease off. Let her come round and then back on. Straighten her up. Square left. Away we go. Up through the chicane. That's it. Steady. Let her roll through, and as soon as you're square this one, go. That's it. Back on it. Chicane and straight round to the left. That's it. Flying press with the acute right. Don't overrun it. Down, just let it come round. Gentle. Hook it in if you can. And back on the power. Away you go. Good. Follow around. In through the chicane. Over the bridge. And chicane on the other side, followed by a square run. Nice and smooth through the chicane. Nice little pop there again. A little bit more than ease. And then squeeze, away you go. Good. Keep it going, keep it going, keep it going, keep it going. Good. Nicely done. Turn one, let her roll, let her roll. Now break a little. Good, well done. That's better. And squeeze, away you go. it, hold it, hold it. Away you go. So ease it back a bit now. Square right, square left, 3. Take a bit more, take a bit more, take a bit more. Good, that's fine, good. Keep it going. Nicely done. And back on, away you go. Steady. Good. Roll through, power on, go, 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 go. Good. And across the line, braking, braking, good. And well done.
Hey. 2 out of 2, mate. 2 out of 2.
Nicely done, nicely done. Thank you very much, gents. Cheers, thank you. Okay. Let's take her home. Alright, alright, alright.
So here it is, the Lancia Delta S4. We couldn't do a video about the Group B era without having this car. And to be honest, Lancia were very quick off the mark with Group B. The 037 was the first car built specifically for Group B, and it won the Rally Championship in 1983, the first year of Group B. But the writing was on the wall. They realised straight away that to compete with the Quattro, they needed four-wheel drive, and development started early on to get this car ready. Of course, by then, the Peugeot come along in 1984 with the mid-engined 205 T16 and showed that you really need a mid-engined car in order to compete going forward. So combining the supercharger that they'd mastered with the 037 and the mid-engine layout with four-wheel drive and a turbocharger, they managed to get a relatively small four-cylinder engine to produce over 500 brake horsepower in competition trim. It was launched at the RAC Rally in 1985, and of course it won the event first time out. Now by 1985 there were already people complaining that the cars were too fast and the crowds were too big, and to be honest, if they'd managed to control the crowds, Group B would have probably carried on for many years more. But unfortunately, a series of tragedies in 1986 meant that that was the last year of Group B, and that was the one year that the Delta S4 had to shine, and it did indeed dominate rallying in that year. The only car that could really compete was the Peugeot 205 T16, and between the two of them they pretty well carved up the championship for that year. This particular S4 has a very impressive rally pedigree, but before that, before it was painted and liveried, back in 1985 it was photographed and used for the FIA papers to homologate the Delta S4 by Lancia. Once the photographers had finished with the car, it received Martini livery and was taken by the works team for winter testing and driven by no less than Henry Toivonen himself. In 1986 the car received this livery and was one of 2 chassis used by Dario Serrato to win the 1986 European Rally Championship. Filippo Sapino from the Ford Gear Design Studio came up with the shape of the RS200, and it was launched at the 1984 Turin Motor Show to great acclaim. But by now Peugeot was already on the rally stages with the T16-205, another mid-engined 4-wheel drive turbocharged car. The RS200 was still getting off the starting blocks. So what could they do to try and improve and learn on the lessons of the 1700? Well, first of all, they tried to use as many components from production cars as was reasonably feasible. The RS200 actually had 900 of its 2,900 components from a production car. And this had a lot of benefits, not only for production, but also, if you think about it from the rally stages point of view, if there were parts that were off the production line, it's easy to grab those and reduce the number of specialist parts required to maintain the cars, making them more reliable. And if you look at the car, you can see certain aspects were pretty obvious. The Sierra windscreen, the doors were moulded off cut down Sierra doors, so the side glass would have been, when it's not perspex for rallying, cut down versions of the Ford Sierra. The door handle, various other components under the skin were also Ford components from the production line, and that meant that the car stood a better chance of being reliable as well as rapid. By anybody's standards, going from a show car in 1984 to competing in the World Rally Championship by 1986 was a fast turnaround by anybody's books. But such is the world of Group B rallying, and such was the development that had been taking place by other manufacturers, the RS200 was already at a disadvantage. By 1986, all the manufacturers already knew that the age of the Group B car was over. It was the last year. It had already been announced that they were not going to be competing in 1987. It was the last hurrah. And the other manufacturers were already in EVO stage. Now, the EVO side of Group B allowed a manufacturer to produce a further 20 cars on top of the 200, which would have an EVO spec. So that would be aerodynamic tweaks, there would be certain engine tweaks allowed. They were limited, but it still allowed the other manufacturers who were now in the EVO stage to have taken an extra leap. And the RS200 was still basically the standard road car that had been rushed to the rally stages, and as such it was at a disadvantage.
My name's Carl Ashdown.
And this is your RS200?
This is my RS200, which I've recently purchased.
Followed by number 50, the flame-throwing Audi Quattro.
Put it like that to make like a lid, okay?
Kinks.
That's the Lego one in here. The Metro 6R4, before it had even entered its first World Rally Championship event, the RAC Rally of 1985, was packing 400 brake horsepower, up from 350 from the development cars. You had the Quattro Sport S2, as it now was, packing over 560 brake horsepower, and still, that only managed to win one rally with Walter All at the wheel. Stig Blomqvist managed to come second in one, but by Audi standards that was a bit of a failure. The Quattro didn't manage to compete with the nimbleness of the Peugeot 205 T16. That was the only car that from the beginning of its life could take on the Quattros, and by the time it had gone into Evo spec could take on the massively powerful Delta S4. The Delta S4 had supercharging and turbocharging. It was incredibly powerful, incredibly fast, incredibly light, and incredibly dangerous. But the 205, being so nimble as well as powerful, could challenge it on a one-to-one basis in certain conditions. The RS200 was at a disadvantage. It was basically in its basic Group B spec. The Evo version hadn't been homologated yet. So Ford were at a disadvantage. And it is his last year of Group B. So it's with some credit that Kalle Grundle managed to come third in that year's Swedish Rally. And that would remain the best result the RS200 managed in World Rallying. But that isn't the end of the story.
My name is Nigel Mummery. I'm very luckily got a number of RS200s, of which the one you see beside me is we call Taz because its number is A45 TAS. This was actually the second RS200 that I got. The first one that I got, I'd been involved in tarmac rallying and had escort Cosworths, and when I brought the first one home, it's the only car I've ever had that when my wife opened the garage door, she said, "God, that's lovely. You're not going to rally that, are you?" So that was a slight shock for me. So then I looked around, and luckily I found this second one that had also got a Motorsport UK logbook. So it could be used in tarmac rallying, which is what I wanted to do. And I bought this one, which was meant to be complete, but wasn't quite complete. It had basically been built up from a set of parts from a rallycross car. Will Gollop had them stored in his garage for quite a while, and the car, or the parts, had been bought by a guy in Scotland and mainly put together. He'd driven it a couple of times and decided he didn't like turbo cars because he was used to 6R4s. So he stuck with his 6R4s, and I luckily got an RS200. As you'll see from a lot of the stickers on it, it has been abroad quite a lot. I've been to Czech Republic, France, Germany, Holland, Belgium, Spain, Portugal. I've really enjoyed going to some of the Group B rallies that they have on the continent. The people just love the car out there. Nothing to do with the driver, it's just the car they're interested in. So I've had some good fun in it. I had some reliability issues initially, but it's been very reliable since I've sorted them out. And I'll just tell you a little bit about the car. The car, it was, as I say, a set of bits that Will Gollop had stored, but also it's got a bit of history to it, as much as it was originally commissioned by Ted Toivonen to do the Paris-Dakar Rally, and it's got one or two differences from a normal RS200, and I'll just show you some of those.
Yeah, please do.
So first thing is, if you look at the roll cage in it, it's got a roll cage which is a much bigger diameter than a normal roll cage, and it's also got additional stiffening bars that go through behind the dash. The second thing it's got is I'll lift the hood and then you'll be able to see that better. The rear window is in a different place to a normal car. It's been shortened and moved forward, and that was in order to give you much better access to the engine. So by moving it towards the cabin, you've got really good access to anything on the engine. The next thing it's got that's different is it's got one of these each side, one of these bars, which is a stiffening bar that comes down to give added stiffness to the chassis. And the other thing it's got is a rallycross bumper. The rallycross bumpers are different from the normal bumpers, which have additional lights in the middle for the fog lights, and this has got a total crosspiece. So there are the differences between this car and some of the conventional road cars that we see.
The Works rally cars had a lever to the left of the gear lever as you see it here, and what that did was it allowed the driver to alter the power transfer from front to rear. He could have 100% rear wheel drive where it was considered competitive on tarmac stages. It would be a standard 63 to the rear and 37 to the front, or he could alter it to 50-50 in extremely tricky conditions. Tell us about the engines in your cars, because again, what people need to know is there's a road spec engine which is 246 brake horsepower.
Yes, about, yeah.
Then there was the Works cars that were rallied in 1986 with 444, was that right?
That's sort of, yes.
So yours are EVOs spec engines.
So in the Group B era, you could produce the Evolution cars, which were based on the original cars, and you had to produce, I don't know,
I think it was 20,
might have been 20, yeah. 20 of these cars. Now, Ford had some problems with the standard 1.8 in as much as they were cooling problems. They knew they had them, and they always wanted to go to a slightly bigger capacity. So they commissioned Brian Hart to design and develop a EVO engine. The EVO engine is not at all like the standard 1.8 engine. It is actually 20 millimeters longer, and therefore they had to do some modifications to put it in, but it solved all of the cooling problems that they had, and it is an unbelievable engine. It is such that people now look at it and say this engine has been designed so that everything is right on it. If I just say that I have had 3 engines built up for EVO spec, and they just produce phenomenal power.
Because it's a 2.1, isn't it, rather than a 1.8? It is
2.143, I think, and the number was chosen because it put them in a category which was very suitable for them to do the FIA regs, so that's why they chose that capacity.
Right, and the other thing about that engine was, if I'm correct, the original engines were sort of a development of the Cosworth BDA. I think it was the BDF by the time. Was it BDF by the time?
Yeah, that's right. It was the BDT.
Yeah.
The BDE and BDA, BDF, BDT. Yes.
Yeah. So this is basically a separate development.
Yeah. Nothing fits from the BD series, whereas the BD series, a lot of it is all common with the BDT. That's correct. They had to do a couple of modifications to get the engine in the car. They had to put a couple of small depressions in the chassis, which is how you can always tell if something is a proper Evo engine and a proper Evo chassis. And they put a hole in the bulkhead to get at the distributor, although I'm running coil packs on this, not a distributor.
What sort of horsepower does that engine produce? Because I mean, 446 sounds impressive enough to me, but I mean, for the Evo, it was...
In the day, they were probably produced about 600. I have one that's producing 722. Quite happily.
That is phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. The other thing you were telling me is that these cars were all type approved. They went through the full crash testing. Yes. I know the chassis was an ex-Lotus engineer, and it was an aluminium chassis with steel subframes to make things easy to replace. So everything was crash tested, so it's properly homologated as a road car.
Yes, there is I don't know if it's a video, just a still picture around on the internet where you can see an RS200 going into a solid wall and crumpling at the front. So part of the Ford spec was that they did crash test the car so it could be built up and sold as a standard road car. But yeah, the chassis is it's aluminium honeycomb skinned, and then it's bonded together, and there are hard points for bolting on the front and rear steel structures that support all the suspension. So in its day and age, it was really well ahead of its time. Whereas all the other Group B cars were mainly just modified production cars. This, it's all different from a clean sheet of paper.
Now here is the car that very nearly didn't make it onto this video, largely because there aren't any. There's only two that are anywhere near drivable. One is hidden in the archives at Citroën, and there is this one, and it is the Citroën BX 4TC. And if you haven't heard of it, you're not necessarily to blame. They only really competed in 1986, and even then only in 3 races, because it was effectively still in development and was rushed in to be able to compete in the last year of Group B. It has, by all accounts, a Peugeot engine block mounted ahead of the front axle in a 4-wheel drive system similar to the Audi Quattro, except unusually for 4-wheel drive cars, it doesn't have a centre diff, which can make driving them challenging, I imagine. Other things about the car that are unusual is that it has the Citroën hydraulic suspension, because they want to be as close as possible to the BX. Now, having only taken part in 3 rallies, it didn't have a chance to shine, and had it appeared, say, 4 years earlier, it might well have been developed into a reasonably competitive car. But it was overweight, underdeveloped, and I think the best result was 6th in Sweden. But here it is. We've got one, and it's on the video. The history of this car is shrouded in mystery, not least because Citroën destroyed all the records of the Citroën BX 4TC, but it is understood from the evidence that has been found on the car, such as the dust and the damage to the rear suspension arches and so on, that this is probably the car driven in the Acropolis Rally by Jean-Claude Androuet. At the time Group B was banned, all the manufacturers were working on their Group S cars, which were to follow Group B. Group S was to have even more power, more limited numbers, ironically, to try and keep the costs down. Audi was working on a mid-engined Quattro. Peugeot were working on a 405 based car with a slightly longer wheelbase that ended up going on to endurance rallying and doing very well in the Dakar Rally. Ford had an Evo version of the RS200, and Austin Rover had already been working on the Evo versions of the Metro 6R4. Sadly, we can only speculate what that might have been like, but with the crowds running on in front of the cars, something had to be done. Unfortunately, rather than try to slow the cars down and limit them and control the crowds, they just banned Group B, and an era was over. It's hard to believe, looking back now, that Ford and the other manufacturers struggled to sell these beautiful racing cars. I mean, even at the time, you only had to look at the story of the GT40. Ford again had produced a car to enter racing. They had won spectacularly and produced a road version, and they couldn't give them away. The RS200, by the time that had come into production, you could see what had happened with the GT40 and how the values had risen, but still nobody had the foresight back then to invest in these former rally cars. Just like the MG Metro 6R4s, Ford RS200s did find a home in rallycross and were very successful. In fact, in the late 1980s, 88 to the noughties, all the top-end winners were effectively Group B cars. There was also a monster version that was built a decade later for Stig Blomqvist to break the record at Pikes Peak in America. Of course, today we appreciate them for the beautiful machines that they are, and to me it doesn't matter whether a car's got works history or not. Group B cars were limited. The maximum you would find, if they'd followed the rules completely, is 220, including the Evo spec cars. None of the manufacturers produced 220 cars. There were cars that were written off. There were cars that were just not built. There were cars that were stripped down to use as spares. So therefore, each surviving Group B car is a thing to be celebrated. It is a thing to be cherished. And whether it's a works car or a car that's come since, being a hand-built car of such small numbers means that each one has its own individual story. Each one is special. And to me, these Group B cars are as important now as they were when they went into the rally stages, because they enthuse children.
I will start that again. My French is not very good.